The world knew Claudine Longet. The French-born singer and actress, with her delicate beauty and whispery voice, was the epitome of 1960s glamour. As the wife of beloved entertainer Andy Williams, she was a fixture in the celebrity jet set. After their divorce, she found a new life and a new love in the exclusive enclave of Aspen, Colorado, with Olympic skier Vladimir Spider Sabich. Sabich was a golden boy of American skiing, a world champion who embodied the Aspen lifestyle of athleticism and a press ski decadence. On March 21, 1976, the facade shattered. In Sabich's Starwood home, a single .22 caliber bullet ended his life. Longet's account was one of a tragic accident. She claimed Sabich was teaching her how to handle the pistol, showing her how to release the magazine, when the gun unexpectedly went off. It was a story of a clumsy, dreadful mistake, but almost immediately the evidence began to tell a more complicated, more sinister story. The autopsy findings were critically inconsistent with a demonstration. Sabich was shot from a distance of approximately 6 feet. He was bent over at the waist, facing away from Longet. This is not the posture of someone intimately handling a weapon with another person. Prosecutors would later argue this was the posture of a man, perhaps packing a bag, turning away, vulnerable to an attack from behind. The investigation was immediately hampered by its own missteps, a series of errors that would prove fatal to the prosecution's case. Police, perhaps starstruck or simply incompetent, entered the home without a warrant. They found and seized Longet's personal diary without proper procedure. In its pages, they read her desperate writings about Sabich's waning affection, her fear of him leaving her. This was a motive, but it was evidence that would never see a jury room. Furthermore, blood and urine samples taken from Longet revealed the presence of both alcohol and cocaine. Yet, because these samples were obtained without consent or a warrant, they too were ruled inadmissible. And then there was the gun. The murder weapon itself was hopelessly compromised. Instead of being bagged and tagged as evidence, it was wrapped in a towel, and stored in a police officer's personal glove compartment for days, allowing any potential fingerprints or residue to be contaminated or destroyed. Facing these catastrophic procedural errors, the prosecution's case crumbled. Longet, initially facing a serious manslaughter charge, was ultimately convicted only of the nebulous crime of negligent homicide, a misdemeanor. Her sentence? A symbolic 30 days in jail to be served at her convenience around her ski schedule, and a minuscule $25 fine. The public outcry was immense. It appeared that celebrity justice had prevailed, that wealth and fame could buy a different kind of outcome. The case of Claudine Longet became less about the death of Spider Sabich and more about a justice system that seemed to have two sets of rules. It was a perfect storm of fame, privilege, and incompetence, leaving a permanent question mark over what truly happened in that Aspen home. Number 2, Donna Yaklich. Nearly a decade later and a world away from the glitter of Aspen, in the industrial town of Pueblo, Colorado, Donna Yaklich lived in a very different kind of prison. Her jailer was her husband, Dennis Yaklich, a state corrections officer. To the outside world, he was a lawman. To Donna, he was a brutal tyrant. Testimony would later reveal years of systematic abuse, beatings, humiliation, and psychological torture. She was, in the clinical sense, a textbook case of what would become known as battered woman syndrome. Her world was one of constant fear, of walking on eggshells, of believing that any misstep could result in a savage beating or worse. The syndrome creates a state of learned helplessness, a psychological paralysis where the victim believes escape is impossible, and that the abuser is omnipotent. In December of 1985, Donna Yaklich saw her escape route. It wasn't through a shelter or the police, it was through a contract killing. She allegedly paid two brothers, Charles and Eddie Greenwell, the sum of $4,200 to murder her husband. The plan was executed with cold precision. As Dennis Yaklich arrived home and stepped out of his truck into his driveway, he was gunned down. The Greenwell brothers were quickly apprehended and pointed the finger directly at Donna. The prosecution's case was straightforward. This was a premeditated murder for financial gain. Dennis had 3 life insurance policies, and Donna was the beneficiary. But her defense team mounted a groundbreaking argument. They did not deny her involvement. Instead, they argued that her actions were, in the most profound sense, self-defense. They claim that after years of abuse, she genuinely believed with every fibre of her being that it was only a matter of time before Dennis killed her. Hiring his killers was, in her traumatized mind, her only possible path to survival. The case became a legal firestorm, forcing the Colorado courts to grapple with a difficult question. Can the defense of self-defense be stretched to cover a planned, paid-for homicide days or weeks after the immediate threat? The Colorado Court of Appeals drew a hard line. They ruled that the core of self-defense is an imminent threat of bodily harm. By hiring hitmen, Yaklich had inserted time and deliberation into the equation, thus voiding any claim to an imminent threat. The court acknowledged the battered woman syndrome but declared it irrelevant in a contract killing scenario. Yet, in a fascinating twist of the human element, the jury seemed to understand the nuance the law could not accommodate. They acquitted Donna Yaklich of first-degree murder. They could not bring themselves to condemn her as a cold-blooded killer. However, they convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder, and she was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Her case remains a landmark, a tragic legal paradox where a woman's desperate bid for freedom from abuse became the very thing that locked her in a prison of concrete and steel. Number 3, Shawna Louise Nelson. The town of Greeley, Colorado was rocked to its core on January 23, 2007, by a murder so brazen and so calculating it seemed ripped from a Hollywood thriller. The victim was Heather Garros, a wife and mother. The shooter was dressed in a black robe and a Grim Reaper's mask, but this was no random act of violence. It was the climax of a toxic love triangle that reached deep into the local law enforcement community itself. The killer was Shawna Nelson. She was a 911 dispatcher married to a Weld County Sheriff's deputy, Ken Nelson. But her marriage was a facade. She was deeply embroiled in a passionate affair with Ignacio Ig Garros, a detective with the Greeley Police Department. For a time, the illicit relationship satisfied her, but when Heather Garros discovered the affair, Ig ended it, choosing to repair his marriage. For Shawna Nelson, this wasn't a rejection, it was a declaration of war. Her obsession curdled into a homicidal rage. She began sending Ig threatening messages. "You broke my heart, you fucked me, be prepared." She even left voicemails for Heather, who, tragically, dismissed them, never believing the threat was real. Nelson's plan was diabolical in its detail. She acquired a Grim Reaper costume. She studied Heather's routine, learning exactly when she would leave her workplace at the credit union. On the night of the murder, Nelson lay in wait. As Heather walked to her car, the macabre figure emerged and fired 2 shots at point-blank range into Heather's head. But Nelson's plan extended beyond the murder itself. In a move of breathtaking betrayal, she attempted to frame her own husband. After the shooting, she was found driving his truck while wearing his clothes, his underwear, his socks, even his baseball cap, hoping to plant his DNA and implicate him in the crime. The trial was a spectacle. The most damning testimony came from Nelson's best friend, Michelle Moore, who testified that Nelson had confessed the entire plan to her. In a desperate gambit, Nelson took the stand and made a shocking claim that she and Moore had been secret lovers and that Moore's testimony was an act of jealous revenge. It was a claim the jury did not believe. The aftermath was a wave of devastation. Igaraus resigned from the police force, consumed by guilt and grief. Ken Nelson divorced Shawna and moved away with their children. Shawna Nelson was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Her case is a stark lesson in how obsession can poison the mind, turning a person who was supposed to serve and protect into a monster in a reaper's mask. Number 4. Miriam Francis Helmick. In the quiet community of Whitewater, Colorado, Alan Helmick was a successful businessman who seemingly had it all. What he didn't know was that the greatest threat to his life was sharing his home. On June 10, 2008, he was found shot to death in his kitchen. His wife Miriam claimed she had discovered the scene after returning from errands, describing a ransacked home that suggested a burglary gone wrong. But from the very beginning, investigators were skeptical. The ransacking seemed staged. Nothing of significant value was missing, and Miriam Helmick's behaviour was off. She seemed performative in her grief. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a financial motive. Miriam had been systematically forging her husband's signature on checks, siphoning over $40,000 from their accounts. The marriage was crumbling under the weight of debt and deceit. The plot thickened when investigators learned that just 6 weeks before the murder, Alan's car had been mysteriously set on fire. When police had asked Alan if he suspected Miriam, he defended her, insisting she would never do such a thing, and asked them to drop the inquiry. It was a tragic act of loyalty to a wife who was already plotting his death. Then, Miriam Helmick made a fatal mistake. In a bid to throw off suspicion and paint herself as the next target, she fabricated a threat. She claimed to have found a card on her doorstep with a chilling message. "Alan's sick was first, you're sick next. Run, run, run." It was a dramatic ploy to make herself look like a victim. But investigators were thorough. They tracked the card to a local store and reviewed the security footage. There, clear as day, was Miriam Helmick, purchasing the card herself. When confronted, she crumbled, offering a pathetic excuse that she only did it to make the police work harder on the case. This single act of fabrication destroyed her credibility entirely. The jury saw her for what she was, a calculating liar who murdered her husband for money and then tried to manipulate the investigation. She was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder for the car fire, and multiple counts of forgery, receiving a sentence of life plus 78 years. Her case is a masterclass in how greed and a tangled web of lies can ultimately strangle the liar. Number 5. Cara Laurel Lounsbury. The murder of a parent is one of the most unforgivable taboos, a fundamental betrayal of the very people who gave you life. The case of Cara Lounsbury is a horrifying example of this taboo, compounded by grotesque violence and cold financial calculation. On January 15th, 2009, Harold Hap Enander and his wife, Velva Sue, were found shot to death in their bed. The scene was one of overkill, particularly for Velva Sue. She hadn't just been shot. After being wounded, she was savagely bludgeoned with a hard object, suffering over 20 lacerations to her skull before being shot one final time. This was not just a murder. It was an execution fueled by pure, unadulterated hatred. All evidence pointed to Hap's daughter, Cara Lounsbury. The motive was laid bare during the trial. The family was deeply fractured. Lounsbury resented her father and harboured a pathological hatred for her stepmother, whom she viewed as an interloper. But beneath the emotional turmoil was a powerful financial incentive. Hap was a successful businessman, and Lounsbury stood to inherit a significant life insurance payout. In a cruel irony, Hap had been trying to mend the relationship. He had put both Cara and her brother on the payroll of his company, Aquahot, for doing little to no work. He was essentially paying them to be in his life. It wasn't enough. After the murders, Lounsbury ransacked the house to stage a burglary and even attempted to point suspicion at her own brother. The jury saw through the charade. The specific, excessive violence directed at her stepmother revealed the personal vendetta at the heart of the crime. They convicted her on 2 counts of first-degree murder after just 7 hours of deliberation. The prosecutor captured the essence of the case, stating, "There is never a good motive for murder, but to kill your own parents for money is exceptionally heinous." Cara Lounsbury received 2 life sentences, a permanent end to the family dynasty she sought to control. Number 6. Heather Maria Trujillo. Some cases are shocking not for their complexity, but for their senseless, almost unimaginable brutality. The death of 7-year-old Zoe Garcia in December 2007 is one such case. It is a story that horrified a nation and ignited a fierce debate about video game violence and parental responsibility. Zoe was placed in the care of her 17-year-old half-sister, Heather Trujillo, and Trujillo's boyfriend, Lamar Roberts. What happened next was beyond comprehension. The teens, allegedly inspired by the ultra-violent video game Mortal Kombat, began to emulate the game's fatalities on the helpless child. Zoe was subjected to a sustained and brutal assault. She was hit, kicked, and body-slammed repeatedly. The autopsy revealed the horrifying extent of the violence. Over 20 bruises carpeting her small body, a broken wrist, and catastrophic internal injuries, including bleeding and swelling in the brain. She died of blunt force trauma, a phrase that barely captures the agony she endured. Both teens were charged as adults. The case also exposed a tragic history of systemic failure. Child Protective Services in both Colorado and New Mexico had multiple previous contacts with Zoe's mother, Donna Trujillo, for allegations of neglect and abuse. A 2003 case in New Mexico had even seen her charged with abandonment after she left her children with a sitter and never returned. Yet, Zoe remained in this unstable and dangerous environment. Heather Trujillo accepted a plea deal, testifying against Roberts in exchange for a lesser charge of child abuse, negligently causing death. She was sentenced to 18 years, suspended for a 6-year youth offender program. Roberts received 36 years in prison. The case stands as the eternal testament to the vulnerability of children and the catastrophic consequences that can occur when fantasy violence bleeds into a terrible, unforgivable reality. Number 7. Amberleetorrez. Our final case forces us to confront the complex and fraught intersection of severe mental illness and criminal responsibility. The story of Amber Torres is not one of calculated greed or obsession, but rather a heartbreaking descent into psychosis and unimaginable violence. In 2004, 19-year-old Amber Torres embarked on a days-long rampage that left 2 men dead and a community terrified. Her victims were chosen at random. John Hand, the 55-year-old founder of Colorado Free University, was stabbed over 30 times inside his own home. The next day, Mesfin Gesagne, a 45-year-old Denver cab driver simply trying to earn a living, was stabbed 39 times. The overkill was extreme, suggesting a rage far beyond a simple robbery motive. To understand this violence, one must look at Torres's history. Friends and family described a bright girl who had been irrevocably shattered by a horrific trauma at age 16. She was violently raped and had her throat slit. She survived the physical wounds, but her psyche did not. She developed severe PTSD, plunged into substance abuse as a form of self-medication, and underwent a drastic personality change. The person she had been was gone, replaced by a vortex of pain and psychosis. The legal system recognized that she was operating in a different reality. A judge declared her incompetent to stand trial, finding she couldn't rationally assist in her own defense. After treatment, a jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity on the murder charges. She was not sent to prison, but committed to the Colorado Mental Health Institute, a secure psychiatric facility. This case does not offer easy answers. The victims and their families suffered unimaginable losses, yet Torres was also a victim of a brutal crime that broke her mind. Her case forces us to ask, can we hold someone legally responsible for crimes committed when they are divorced from reality? Is commitment to a mental hospital a get-out-of-jail-free card, or is it a different form of incarceration for a different kind of brokenness? The case of Amber Torres remains a haunting, tragic grey area in the black and white world of crime and punishment. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there.